I've got an itch I can't scratch, I'm missing a piece that completes a whole part of me, an open wound scar to see. Everybody come here, gather round, welcome to the freak show, the best in town. What the hell's wrong with me? I don't get along with anybody, honestly. I've been living in my own head, constantly thoughts jumbled round, think I need a new lobotomy. Wait, all these thoughts are too negative. I don't want.
Wow, for some reason my intro does not want to work today. How's everyone? I know I saw you. Hold on a second. I know what it is. Hold on. Okay. Can you hear me now? You was jamming. I have a short intro. I made it a minute because it's either too long or too short. I don't know. Y'all know that I smoke, right? Everybody knows I smoke. I have never smoked enough to want to hurt somebody, much less kill them, right? One time I what the freak is it called? The wax. You know the wax, okay? Dab. Don't get me I'm gonna get myself not monetized for this live. One time I dabbed and I went to go to the store and I got lost in the backyard. The gate to the store was in the backyard because they lived behind the store. Anyway, one dab and I got lost in the backyard. So maybe, hi Tyler. So maybe if you smoke a lot of dabs, I don't know. But her defense was marijuana psychosis, right? Evidently it works because involuntary she manslaughter, she got 2 years probation. 2 years probation. Oh, all right. That's Nevaeh's boyfriend. 2 years probation for stabbing him 108 times. She got 2 years probation. Let's hear about it.
People have this belief that cannabis or marijuana is this benign, innocuous substance. And I can tell you that the clients that I see in my office ruined lives and destroyed futures from marijuana.
A woman receives what some would consider a slap on the wrist by a California judge after she was sentenced to probation and no prison time for fatally stabbing a man she was dating more than 100 times. A California jury found Bryn Spejcher stabbing death of 26-year-old accountant Chad O'Melia. According to reports, Bryn and Chad had been dating just a few weeks when she attacked him after taking hits from a bong filled with marijuana. Bryn stabbed Chad 108 times, killing him after suffering from a cannabis-induced psychotic break.
So psychosis is literally a departure from reality. People lose touch with reality. Psychosis can come in many forms. There's symptoms of psychosis, and that can be paranoia, auditory hallucinations, disorganized thinking. So people who are in a psychosis may at the time not know the difference between right and wrong, or may not be able to restrain themselves or appreciate the wrongfulness of their actions. So every state, as you know, has an NGRI statute. In fact, some states actually don't have an NGRI defense, but California does. So it is possible for someone in a psychosis to possibly not have the capacity to know the difference between right and wrong. And that is how this marijuana fits into it.
I spoke with forensic psychiatrist Dr. Daniel Bober. He tells me many people believe marijuana doesn't present a danger, but he's seen lives ruined from the drug.
The fact is that in the last 30 years, the percentage of THC has increased dramatically in marijuana. It used to be around 2 or 3%, and now it's sometimes as high as 60 or 70%. So we're seeing these cases of psychosis that don't go away. The classical thinking was that it was temporary, but there are certain people, and we don't know who they are, that are vulnerable to these effects of marijuana and can become completely psychotic to the point where they may never recover and may need lifelong medication. And we don't know who are vulnerable to these effects of the marijuana. You know, some people can smoke marijuana for 40 or 50 years, they never have a problem. But some people, whether it's because they have a genetic propensity to develop psychosis or schizophrenia, may be more prone to these effects. Psychosis can be just as extreme and just as symptomatic as schizophrenia. And there is a belief that
Look how pretty she is. And she just ruined her freaking life. And dude's background, man, I'd like to be there. A place like that.
in certain people that the marijuana or the cannabis might touch off these symptoms, they may develop a permanent schizophrenic illness due to the substance.
Police say when officers arrived on scene, they found Chad in a pool of blood and Bryn screaming hysterically while still holding the bread knife used to kill him. During the violent melee, she also stabbed her beloved service dog to death.
To me, the fact that she stabbed herself along with the service dog and not just the boyfriend would, speak to the random nature of the crime, that he wasn't the intended target.
Wait, she had a service dog. So she has already a mental health issue, right? She shouldn't be smoking marijuana anyway to begin with, just like any other drug. I don't know what she's diagnosed with, but goodness gracious.
Target, and that there was very little organized thinking to her actions, and that she was simply randomly stabbing whoever was around her.
And when officers tried to disarm her, Bryn tried to take her own life. She plunged the knife into her own neck and stabbed herself repeatedly. Police reportedly had to use a taser and several baton blows to disarm her before then calling paramedics. Bryn had been out on bond since the 2018 stabbing and her subsequent arrest. She was originally charged with murder, but prosecutors asked for a lesser charge after the state's expert determined Bryn was, quote, acutely psychotic from the bong rips. During her trial, more than 5 years after the shocking crime, both the prosecution
Y'all look at that face, her eyes. That girl did that on purpose. Come on now.
and defense agreed the attack was caused by weed. Bryn's lawyers argued Chad had pressured and intimidated her into taking the last bong hit. And under California law, people are responsible for their actions when impaired by alcohol or drugs unless their intoxication was involuntary. The jury rejected that argument, only deliberating less than 4 hours before finding her guilty of involuntary manslaughter. Spejcher faced up to 4 years in prison along with sentence enhancements. But according to KTLA, the judge ruled that given the facts in the case, he didn't believe it was warranted, ultimately letting Bryn off with probation and no hard time behind bars.
So I know that people are uncomfortable with the insanity defense. This particularly was true after the attempted assassination of President Reagan. There were some changes in the law. People are very uncomfortable about not holding someone responsible when they commit a crime. But the fact is that, using a substance is not a defense for a crime. That would be called voluntary intoxication. But psychosis that is induced by a substance could be used for an insanity defense. So I think that it is possible that if someone were psychotic, that they may not be responsible for their actions. So even though that makes people uncomfortable, it is something that the law recognizes it as a valid defense. I agree with the decision. I think that most people don't realize that the insanity defense is used less than 1% of the time, and it is even successful even less frequently. So despite what people might see on the movies or on TV, the insanity defense is very rarely used, and even more.
Man, these camera people are getting awesome shots of her. Look at her now.
Rarely successful. So I think in this particular case, the facts were so extreme that.
Yeah, she looks like Taylor Business, like she's about to attack her attorney.
It turned out to be a valid defense.
Local outlets reported outrage over the judge's decision to let Bryn off with probation. Here you can see Chad's father, who stood outside the courthouse prior to sentencing, demanding justice for his son. He previously spoke with News Nation's Ashley Banfield after Bryn's charges were reduced and shared insight into Bryn and Chad's relationship.
Information that I've heard, all the testimony I've heard, that they were getting along just fine. It was very, very early on. They had just met each other about 3 weeks ago.
Dang.
So the relationship hadn't run its course or gotten very far into it at all. But no, there was no fighting or arguing or anything like that. They were both, professional people. My son was an accountant. She was an audiologist. So they both had bright futures. They really did.
According to the Ventura Star, Bryn's sentence prompted an audible response from Chad's loved ones as they exclaimed shock and anger. But Dr. Bober explains the situation isn't as black and white as it may seem.
So this is a lot more than just, quote unquote, someone's.
How many times did she stab her family? 108 times. But she killed her service dog too, Alex. Why would she do that?
Smoking some weed and getting off. This is not the weed itself. This is the disease or the symptoms that is caused by smoking the weed and the psychosis that was a result or touched off by smoking the weed. So smoking the weed may be, again, benign in itself for most people, but in this particular case, they developed something that was caused by the weed or the marijuana, and that is what we're really talking about here. We're not talking about just smoking a joint, so to speak, and getting off, scot-free. We're talking about a disorder that was induced by the cannabis. That is what led to this situation occurring.
So what could Bryn's life look like in the future? Dr. Bober says lifelong treatment is possible.
So the people that suffer from this disorder are treated with antipsychotic medication. Sometimes they can go for about a year and you could see how they do without medication. But very often they may require lifelong or indefinite antipsychotic treatment. And I'm actually dealing with this even just today. It's a question of finding the right medication that they're going to respond to. So sometimes it can be trial and error, but they may need that medication for life to control their symptoms. I think the larger message in all of this is that cannabis is a very, very serious substance. It's not something that should be taken lightly, particularly for people who are developing. It can cause very severe, very significant symptoms, as we're seeing here. And to be aware that it's something that is a significant public health problem, and we all need to be paying attention to that.
Bryn Spejcher was also sentenced to 100 hours of community service if she violates her probation.
100 hours of community service and 2 years probation. That just sounds lovely, doesn't it? For stabbing someone 108 times.
CPA exam. This is parents' dream come true. So why was this golden boy, Chad Amelia?
What do you mean? What do you mean, Richie? I know I had asked you how many times she stabbed like each of her family members, but I didn't see anything after that.
Brutally stabbed, dead, stabbed over 100 times. We think 108 times, but all of you legal eagles know that after multiple stabbings, it's hard to tell how many times someone was stabbed because of overlapping, but we can document 108 times. And you may think, like many sage crime fighters do, he stabbed 108 times. What was he doing wrong? Can I tell you? Nothing. This truly is the golden boy scrubbed in sunshine. And then we learn the woman who stabs her date over 100 times, was in a weed induced frenzy. Now, ask yourself,
Y'all know I like Nancy, right? Y'all know I love Nancy. I disagree with Nancy on this one, you guys. I disagree.
what could be worse than losing your child? Many of you know my fiance was murdered shortly before our wedding, and I thought I knew it all about grief and mourning, deep depression, until a few years ago when I had the twins. And now I know that nothing could be worse than losing your child, except for one thing: losing your child to murder, and the murderer gets straight probation. I'm Nancy Grace. This is Crime Stories. Thank you for being with us here at Crime Stories and on Sirius XM 111. With me, an all-star panel to make sense of what we know right now, including Becca Whitnall at Thousand Oaks Acorn, Andy Kahn, victims' rights advocate, Dr. Othan Mena, medical examiner, Robin Dreek, former FBI behavioral expert, Dr. Chris Mahandi, forensic psychologist and author, Audrey Nafziger, the special district attorney, deputy DA on this case. But first, I want to go to a very special guest joining me. It's Sean Amelia, Chad's father. Chad, how did an evening that started so innocently go so horribly? Beautiful boy. The moment I saw him, all I could think about is my big boy, John David Lynch. When did you learn about what happened, Sean?
It was the morning of May 28th. It was about deputies came to my home, and they were explaining to me initially. Actually, they were trying to determine if I was Chad's father, and when I gave them that information.
Well, wait, where were you? Were you in the kitchen having coffee? Were you getting ready for work? What was happening?
Actually, I was coming down from a home that I owned 4 houses up the street from where I live, because my parents, my mother, and my stepfather, he had progressed into dementia. So I picked up that home hoping that they would move into it. But by the time it was finished being renovated, he had passed.
Oh.
So she never moved into that
So
house.
you guys all grew up as a big extended family. You're all Irish. You came to the U.S. and your son was the first generation American.
Yeah, that's correct. Yes. So the gentleman asked me, he showed me a picture. Chad had a tattoo of what's called a triquetra. It's a Celtic Irish symbol on his forearm, and it symbolizes the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and the unity of all things in the world. And that's how they asked me to identify him. And I said, yeah, that's my son. Worried about what you're doing right now. What's going on?
Okay, wait a minute. Let me understand something, Mr. Amelia. Guys, you were hearing Sean Amelia. This is Chad's father. And he comes up to his home and there's LE law enforcement. And what would you do if somebody says, does your son have a tattoo? No. What's going on? The worst would go through my mind. What happened?
Well, I gave them acknowledgement. Yes, that's I need to go see him wherever he is. I just thought he'd be in a hospital somewhere, or, you know, he was not, you know, it didn't even dawn on me that what he was going to say next, because he said, well, I want to go see him. Where is he? And he said, we cannot allow you to go to this scene. He's deceased. And that's when I realized, you know, that, you know, I just couldn't believe what happened. So I literally dropped to my knees, and I couldn't believe what they had told me. And at that point, just by coincidence, one of my uncles, who is the matriarch of our family, he just happened to pull up into my driveway. And, you know, thank God that he did, because, you know, he kind of pulled me together, and then we all went into the kitchen. I went into the kitchen with the two sheriffs and my uncle, and I had to explain to him what they had just told me. He couldn't believe it. And then the sheriffs asked me right after that, they said, look, we need to notify his mother. Do you want to do that, or do you want us to do it? And I said, well, I don't want her to find out the way I just found out, so I will take care of it. And I called her immediately, and she had an appointment that she was headed to, and I asked her to cancel the appointment. And I drove to her home, which was very close to my home, and I sat her down, and I had to tell her. I'd say, you know, Michelle, I just got some really bad news. Chad, you know, he's dead. And, you know, from that moment forward, I mean, I just, you know, it was like literally was like looking into her eye and seeing something just break in a human being. I've never seen anything like it before, but that's what happened. And I was concerned about leaving her, because I had to, obviously the next person I had to go drive and tell was my mother, and they were very close. And I just, you know, reached out to her sister.
I feel so bad for this man having to go tell his, I'm assuming, ex-wife, they don't live together, that their son just died. And then now he has to go tell his mother, who is obviously older, and they were very close. Yeah, I feel really bad for this guy.
And said, you need to come here. She cannot be here by herself. And she has really good friends, strong friends. So they came and supported her. And then I left, and I had about an hour and 45-minute drive to get to my mom's house. And I remember, you know, telling my mom that, you know, that same thing. I sat her down and just said, Mom. And she knew something was wrong, because I was there with my Uncle Noel and my Uncle Christopher. I took them with me. And my Uncle Noel actually drove me there. And, you know, she goes, what's going on? And I just said, well, Mom, I got some really bad news. I said, Chad is deceased. And, you know, I could see that she was in shock, but she reached out and she grabbed hold of me, and she just looked at me and said, well, you know, Sean, he's in a better place than we are. And that's what she said to me. So that's kind of how the initial understanding of his loss went for me and our family.
Guys, you are hearing the father of Chad Amelia literally scrubbed in sunshine. And I'm not saying that this perfect boy's life is any more or less valuable than anybody else's. It just, the irony, the bad taste of a kid growing up and doing everything right, and then out of the blue, this boy is stabbed over 100 times by his girlfriend. She, in a weed-induced frenzy, and everybody across the country that's legalizing pot, saying it's okay, it's fine. It's not. It is not. I know I'm the voice in the wilderness on this, but I've seen so many victims fall prey to pot. That's not the issue today. That's a much different argument.
This is where I
The issue
disagree.
today is his killer is walking free on straight probation. To Audrey Nafziger, Ventura County Senior Deputy District Attorney who prosecuted this case, she did not agree with straight probation. This was not a deal. You know, you can either plead guilty with a plea deal that the state agrees with the defense and they present it to the judge. You can plead blind plea where you plead guilty and you just throw yourself on the judge's mercy, or you can go to trial. This was not an agreed deal. So don't hold this against her. My question to you, Audrey, is when you hear Mr. Amelia speaking, I mean, I know for all the years I prosecuted violent crimes, I would add that pain to my own heart, and I carry it around to this day. Does it ever become staggering to you? Because sometimes it did to me. I would have to pull off the road when I would leave the courthouse sometimes and just cry. Of course, I couldn't let anybody else see me
Wow.
cry because then I would be weak. But when you hear Mr. Amelia telling his story, and you know he voluntarily took pot, smoked pot, and got so high, she stabbed him. That's not in question. It's not who did it. She did it. How does that hit you, Audrey?
Nancy, you said it exactly right. I carry this, the trauma, the pain. I don't know the pain that Sean knows, but it deeply impacts me. And listening to him, I mean, I brought the tissue box over, and it's just, how can anyone not feel the humanity of losing Chad Amelia? It's just a horrible thing. And in compounding it in this case was the extraordinarily graphic video that I had to watch, I don't even know how many times, maybe 100 times. And it's just something you can never unsee. And it's horrible, a horrible thing to experience. And I think as a prosecutor, you know, we harness that pain and we use it to get through horrible trials and to bring justice as best we can. And that's what I did.
You know, to Andy Kahn joining me, colleague and friend, Director of Victim Services at Crime Stoppers Houston. Andy, I know how much you research every case that you advance. When I look, and I know you've seen pictures of my son, John David, when I look at Chad, this guy, that smile, he's got $1 million smile, just full of life, full of happiness. It just kills me to think what this judge has done.
You know, Nancy, crime victims in this case is like the poster child. They are no longer victims under the guise of this new criminal justice reform that we seem to be operating on. The defendants, like this lady, they are now the new victims, and actual crime victims are basically treated as non-entities. And here's what I really find fascinating. So they're claiming this cannabis-induced psychosis that led her to, stabbing Chad over 100 times. The weed was purchased at this local dispensary. So it's not like people who purchased this type of marijuana all of a sudden get this psychosis induced and they go around stabbing people to death. This is a precedent-setting decision that's going to have far-reaching consequences for future cases. The impact of this decision is frightening.
Joining me is Becca Whitnall, editor, Thousand Oaks Acorn at Acorn.
So now people are going to think, oh, I can go do this and then just get a slap on the wrist, and that's just it. Use that as a defense. That's not okay.
Acorn newspapers. Becca, thank you for being with us. Who is this Judge Worley? David Worley, I believe.
Well, he's a Ventura County Superior Court judge, and I keep asking myself the same thing. I kind of wonder why even have a jury if your ruling is going to kind of almost negate what they found.
So, Becca Whitnall, regarding this judge, I agree with you. Why bother to go through the time and expense of having a jury when you're going to negate everything they do and just sentence the guy to straight probation? I've seen this before in a murder. It was in the Louise Woodward au pair murder where she murdered baby Matthew Epen. The jury came back with a homicide conviction, and the judge sentenced her to straight probation. And they came back, as I recall, with either a murder or voluntary, not involuntary. And the judge just took it upon himself to give straight probation.
It was manslaughter,
It has happened before, and that is why I am calling for a recall. I don't want this judge to just slither off the bench and enjoy.
Exactly, Richie. And then, like Brian Koberger, they always use Lori Vallow's trial as, a way to get their way or whatever. But now people are going to use this case and be like, oh, I smoked too much weed and I just didn't know what I was doing. Whatever.
Retirement. I want a recall effort on David Worley because what he did was wrong. To you, Sean Amelia, I've looked up Worley. He was basically an ambulance chaser in a law firm and then somehow got appointed to the bench and then ran. What is your response to what the judge did, Sean?
Well, I have to agree with, what Becca just said. There are two things that happened that I don't even understand why we were put through them and after what he did. Obviously the first is, the good people of the county of Ventura did their civic duty. They listened to the evidence, they listened to the facts, and they came to a unanimous decision in a very short period of time. And, the DA then asks for the maximum time. Then you have the probation officer recommending felony jail time. And then all of a sudden, all of that collective information gets put in the hands of one individual where there's no checks and balances on. And at that point, he can do whatever he wants. So in my opinion, he failed Chad. He failed the people of Ventura County. He really did not do, in my opinion, he didn't do his job reviewing it objectively and seeing this in the facts that the person as an individual. He was too focused, I believe, on the perpetrator of the crime is an individual and not on the facts of the case.
To Dr. Chris Mohandi joining us, forensic psychologist, author of Evil Thoughts, Wicked Deeds. Dr. Mohandi, thank you for being with us. I was listening to what Sean Amelia was saying as he described being told his son had been stabbed. His immediate reaction was much like mine was when Keith was murdered. I thought if I could just get to him, I could fix it. I could get him to the right hospital, the right doctor. We could perform the right surgery or methods, and everything was going to be fine. That did not happen. It's almost as if you can't take in what you're hearing. What is that psychological phenomena?
Well, I think it's just so traumatic and overwhelming to be presented with the idea that somebody that you're so basically attached to as your own child, as a parent, there's no way. It's unfathomable. It's just something that your mind is incapable of processing. It's too much. So that denial is the first thing that comes up. No, this can't be. And that is actually the beginning of the grief process, is that denial. But it's just such a powerful thing because it goes to that basic, attachment, as well as the idea that, your kids, we're not supposed to see our kids, pass away and die from any cause. We're supposed to go first.
I think it's that the idea that your son or your fiance has been murdered is so out of left field that your mind tries to apply normalcy to what you're hearing and somehow in your mind fix it and make it something acceptable. I don't think your mind, I'm certainly not a shrink, can take it in. What exactly happened? How did the judge reach this outrageous decision that a woman in a pot-induced frenzy who stabs her boyfriend 108 times should walk free? What happened that night? Listen to investigative reporter Nicole Parton.
Vinny Oliveira is upstairs in his room when he hears the sounds of things breaking downstairs. Taking a look down the stairs, Oliveira sees Omelia and Spejcher's dogs together on the landing area, looking scared. Heading downstairs, Oliveira sees furniture toppled. The couch is flipped over and covered in blood, and Omelia is severely wounded. Oliveira says there is a hole where his heart is, with blood everywhere. And Omelia says, "Vinny, please help me. She stabbed me." Vinny Oliveira runs back upstairs to get his phone to call for help.
To Dr. Othan Mena, Ventura County Assistant Chief Medical Examiner, who performed the autopsy on this young man, Chad Amelia. Dr. Othan Mena, the chairs were turned over, furniture was tumbled around. It was clearly violent, very violent. He tried to protect himself, but is there any way that just looked that way to the roommate?
Yes, he was stabbed in the heart and also the lungs and liver. That's actually where most of the severe injuries were located, in the chest and back, along with his neck.
Can anyone survive a stab to the heart, Dr. Mena?
Well, it depends on the severity. If it's a superficial injury and medical aid is rendered shortly after, it's certainly possible, but not when there was this much blood loss and multiple other sites that were injured that were also bleeding.
According to the defense, the defendant in this case, the girlfriend, Bryn Spejcher, had a, quote, psychotic break from reality, and that therefore her use of cannabis pot was involuntary. I mean, the law is very clear, is it not, Audrey Neff-Ziegler, that voluntary use of drugs or alcohol is not a defense. Never a defense unless you, the defendant, are completely comatose. And she's not comatose because she's throwing over sofas and coffee tables and stabbing the victim over 100 times. So her voluntary use of pot is not going to be a defense.
That's correct. That's exactly what the law says, and that's what the jury found in this case.
Let me ask you this. Dr. Mahandi joining us. Did you administer a psychological test to Spejcher before trial? Did you learn anything about the amount of pot she ingested?
Well, the psychological test, like the MMPI-2, which is what I use, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory 2, does not have anything to do with determining how much, cannabis she ingested. That's derived from the toxicology that was from the blood draw at the hospital and so forth. So that testing post, event that I did from a psychological standpoint is not what's going to result in the, cannabis-induced psychosis. That's not what's going to result in the cannabis-induced psychosis diagnosis. That's derived from the fact that there was nothing else in her that she did test positive for THC, and that she has no other history, no other agents that could have caused it, and that it remitted. That means the symptoms went away as soon as she came down from the intoxicating properties of it. Yeah,
I understand. So her state of mind was completely due to smoking a bong. I don't get it, Sean, Amelia. This is Chad's dad. When someone is drunk out of their gourd and they have a car crash and kill a young man, they go down for vehicular homicide, right? So why is this any different? She was sucking on a bong and then went into a pot frenzy and murdered Chad. How is that different?
I don't think it is different. And not being an attorney, it's very hard for people that just go to work every day to take care of their families to understand how you stab somebody 108 times and you don't go to prison. I think there's a case pending right now that's going to be very interesting to hear what the outcome is. It's the Rebecca Grossman case. I understand she ran over 2 people, and it'll be interesting to see if she's treated differently.
I'm very curious why the judge thought the pot is any different, because isn't it true, Becca Whitnall, joining us from Thousand Oaks Acorn, at the time, Spejcher stated she had taken 1 puff of a bong but did not want to smoke anymore. Then she blames the victim, claiming he urged her to smoke more, and that 2 or 3 more puffs made her go into a frenzy. I don't believe that for 1 minute. She's lying.
Yeah, she apparently, and Audrey, please jump in if I'm misstating this, but apparently she had taken the first hit and wasn't told Chad she wasn't feeling anything. So he says, "Oh, let me reload it," and doesn't. She takes the second hit, and that's when hell breaks loose.
I really hard to believe that she was in a frenzy after 2
Thank you, Nancy.
puffs on a bong. But that said, what else do we know happened that evening? Listen to Crime Online.
Vinny Oliveira runs back down the stairs, dialing 911 on his cell phone. Oliveira sees Bryn Spejcher's attack on Chad Amelia hasn't ended. She's still stabbing him as he's fallen to the ground. Oliveira is now outside the condo, screaming for help, crying as he tries to explain to 911 what is happening, but says he's in some type of shock and remembers little of what happens next. He does remember police arriving on the scene and hearing what he thought were stun guns going off a few times. The voices that Bryn Spejcher and only Bryn Spejcher is hearing are telling her she has to keep fighting. She has to keep doing what she's doing. What she is doing is stabbing Chad Amelia at least 108 times, as well as her dog and herself. According to Sergeant Stephen Jenkins, Spejcher says the more violent she is, the more she feels like she is coming back to life.
Robin Dreek joining me, behavior expert, former FBI special agent, and chief of FBI counterintelligence behavioral analysis program, author of Sizing People Up, a veteran FBI agent's manual for behavior prediction. Let me throw a legal phrase on you, Latin. She's effing lying. Her story is all over the place. First, she has one suck on a bong, and then she doesn't want to smoke anymore. Next thing I know, she's gone into a pot frenzy. Now she says, what defense lawyer told her to say that?
Yeah, I like your phraseology. That's about the level of my phraseology too, Nancy. This case is so complex. Yeah, I know. The case is so complex, and I've taken so many notes on this, and it's confusing. But when it's so confusing, I'm looking at behavior arcs all over the place on this one. I think that's what the judge is too. We're trying to figure out the judge's sentencing, because what's his behavior arc that made him give such a light sentence to and countermine basically what the jury said? And then what's her behavior arc? Because this is her behavior was complete deviation, which then makes a lot of incongruencies and makes it very believable for people. But the bottom line here, this whole thing has eroded trust and confidence in the legal system, because there's such an incongruence between the sentencing and between what the jury said, and there's victims everywhere. And like has been said earlier, they're making the perpetrator of the crime the victim, and that's the new trend that has become scary in the whole system.
Yeah, I see that too, Andy Kahn. She's somehow trying to blame him for what she did. And did you hear that? After the roommate sees what's happening, he thinks it's over. He wants to call 911, and the victim, Chad, can still say, help me. He's still alive. He comes back, the roommate, and she's attacking him again, Andy.
You know, Nancy, I've actually lost track of how many people, especially victims of violent crime, have been victimized under this new realm of criminal justice reform. And the rights that you and I and other victim advocate trailblazers have now been essentially steamrolled, and they're pushed under the carpet in the name of criminal justice reform. I wish I could say this is an anomaly, but it's not. It's part of a pattern. Listen to the judge's own statement, where he said, through no fault of her own, that being the offender, the defendant was out of touch with reality.
That's not true.
I agree, but this is what the judge is basing his decision on. This is his perspective, and that's what we're seeing all over the country right now. You have statements saying that, oh gosh, the poor little defendant, she's never going to lead a normal life. She has now, wait for this now, her medical license and ability to help deaf people is at risk. And basically, Chad is a non-entity. He doesn't exist anymore. And that's why I firmly believe in cases like this. And Dad, listen to me, and I'll be more than happy to help you. Your son has to be a catalyst for change. This has got to stop. We're basically victims are now being treated as non-entities, and defendants are of criminal justice reform.
So she's upset that her training as an audiologist to help deaf people could be revoked or impaired because she's a murderer. That's what she's worried about. Did I get that
That's
right,
correct.
Sean? Okay. What else do we know happened?
Officers find Spejcher in a pool of blood holding a knife, and as officers try to disarm her, officers use a taser and several baton blows before they are able to finally disarm Spejcher. A long serrated
baton blows and a taser to calm this woman down? Is that correct, Becca Whitnall?
That's correct.
There's no way.
Blows with the baton before they could get her to let go of the knife that she was stabbing herself with.
Wait a minute. You say she was stabbing herself. Wait a minute. I see the pictures. I see them. those are completely superficial. She doesn't even have a stitch, nothing.
I have to say, in court, it seems
Just
the
like
parties
you said,
agreed that
Alex.
had the police not, or the sheriff's officers not gotten that knife out of her hands, that she likely would have suffered much more. She did have to go to the hospital.
I don't see a stitch. Did she get stitches?
I don't know that she got stitches. I know she was in the hospital
Yeah,
for days.
I don't think so. Looking right at her, I'm looking at the scratches. No, she stabbed this boy to death and she is walking free. Now, brace yourselves. Listen to this.
It doesn't take the jury very long to find Bryn Spejcher guilty of killing Chad O'Melia. The couple had only dated for a couple weeks when Spejcher attacks O'Melia after she takes 2 hits from his bong. There is blood evidence, eyewitness from the roommate, and when police arrive on the scene, she was holding the bloody knife in her hand. But she wasn't convicted of first-degree murder like she was originally charged. Spejcher is convicted of involuntary manslaughter.
Question to you, Audrey Ziegler, Ventura County Senior Deputy District Attorney who worked this case. Why were the charges reduced? Because the jury never even had a chance to look at murder, did they?
That's correct. I'm the second attorney on the case, and when I got this case, the defense finally produced to us their defense strategy of marijuana-induced psychosis, and so we then hired Dr. Mohandi because he is an expert in this area and in forensic psychology in general. And he did the testing. He evaluated her. He went through all of the evidence, including the video evidence. And it's very hard. I think it's very hard for people to grapple with the idea that is what happened here. But I will tell you this, Nancy,
I don't want to change the subject, but I am. I see JLR is posting on X that there are multiple choppers circling looking for Madeline, to see, I guess, where he put her. In the woods. I think they're circling.
You're saying it would be hard for people to believe she was in a psychosis?
Yes.
Okay. Can I ask you a question?
It is. It's hard.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
She's in psychosis because of what?
Because she voluntarily sucked that bong, just like you said. That's right.
She is in psychosis because she sucked a bong and stabbed her boyfriend dead. And I've got to tell you, this woman did not just descend down from heaven. The roommates were very suspicious of her and thought that the victim, in this case, Chad O'Melia, was moving way too fast with her. Take a listen to our cut 2 from Nicole Parton.
Chad O'Melia lives in a condo in Thousand Oaks with 2 roommates and his dog. O'Melia is working at an accounting firm while studying to be a certified public accountant. O'Melia meets audiologist Bryn Spejcher at a dog park, and the two strike up a friendship that quickly moves to something more. Even though the two have only dated a few weeks, one of O'Melia's roommates, Vinny Oliveira, tells the Acorn that Chad was definitely smitten with Bryn Spejcher. He says O'Melia is talking about Spejcher all the time and at one point suggests they might be moving too fast.
So the roommates realized this was moving way too fast. Robin Dreet, you're the behavior expert. When all your friends can see something is wrong and you're the only one that can't see it, particularly when you think you're in love, what is that?
Yeah, it's a lack of loving critics in your life and your ability to listen to them. You're giving yourself your own confirmation bias of what you're seeking, and that's exactly what was going on here. And he confirmed his own bias for her, and it led to his death, unfortunately.
To you, Sean, this is Chad's dad. Had he ever had a serious girlfriend before?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the first thing the sheriff's department asked myself and his mother, Michelle, for was a list of young ladies that he had dated, and we produced that list, and they interviewed them all. And they all, you said he was a gentleman, and he was raised that way, and so was his brother, and so was I.
That's curious, Sean Amelia. It sounds to me like what they were trying to do, the defense, was trying to raise a self-defense strategy, but that was completely impossible. Back to you, Dr. Othan Minna, Ventura County Assistant Chief Medical Examiner. Have you ever handled a case where the victim has been stabbed this many times?
Yes, a few times, a handful of times. There have been this many times in the dozens. Probably not this many, but at least in the 70s to 80s.
So then not
in
this
terms of number.
many. Is it true, Dr. Minna, that when you have so many stab wounds, it's hard to determine the exact number as the stab wounds begin to overlap, and you can't tell if it's 1, 2, or 3 stab wounds in the same cut?
Right, that can happen, especially in terms of internal injuries. They start kind of intersecting each other and crossing each other's paths.
Guys, this is not the first time a judge has completely distorted and thwarted the law in this jurisdiction. Does the name Sean Shirk ring a bell? Take a listen to our cut 18.
Sam Shirk has 5 sons, and oftentimes his sons don't get along with his live-in girlfriend, 59-year-old Margaret Dahl. Sam Shirk's son, Sean, has been staying with his dad and Margaret Dahl, but when Dahl's elderly mother is coming to stay for a visit, Sean has to move out. Around midnight on August 24th, 2019, a few weeks after being forced out of the home he's been living in, Sean Shirk, extremely intoxicated, breaks a back sliding glass door, sneaks into the house, violently attacks Margaret Dahl and her mother, Phyllis Porter. The next morning, when Shirk's brother goes to the home, he discovers the shattered glass door and the women inside.
2 women dead. Now take a listen to cut 20.
Sean Shirk's defense attorney begins working to have the double homicide charges reduced to involuntary manslaughter. At hearings over a 4-year period of time, experts testify about Shirk being the victim of abuse as a child and suffering PTSD. But the biggest thing the defense has proven, Sean Shirk was so intoxicated the night of the murders that he was not in control of his own actions. The prosecutors go along with the defense, and now Shirk's attorney argue that Shirk was drunk and in the midst of a bout with PTSD when he fatally stabbed Margaret Dahl and her mother, Phyllis Porter. The jury finds Shirk guilty of involuntary manslaughter.
Once again, in the same jurisdiction, the defendant commits murder and walks free, even when a jury comes back with a conviction on involuntary manslaughter. But still, the judge sentences in a manner that the defendant walks free. In this case, I want you to hear what the defendant begins saying once she realizes she's getting charged.
According to Spejcher, she tells investigators that she begins hearing a sinister-like voice in her head before stabbing Amelia to death a little after midnight. The VC star points out that under California law, a person is seen as responsible for their actions when impaired by drugs or alcohol, unless their intoxication is involuntary.
Spejcher's defense attorney claims that their client was involuntarily intoxicated and that Amelia had allegedly bullied and intimidated her into smoking the last bit of marijuana.
Now the defense, now they are arguing that the pot Spejcher used was completely different from all the other pot in the world. Again, total BS. Take a listen to our 23 Dave Mack Crime Online.
Bryn Spejcher's lawyers are now claiming that the marijuana she consumed was a strain of the drug with a THC level of more than 30%, significantly higher than the average dose. Lawyers claim that Spejcher was not a regular smoker of marijuana, but the strain Amelia had her smoke had a warning label indicating it was for high-tolerance users only, since its THC content was above the average level of between 18 and 24%. Spejcher's attorneys claim the strain Bryn Spejcher consumed was a strain with 31.8% THC. Prosecutor Audrey Knapsinger told the jury there's no evidence Amelia put anything other than regular old marijuana in the bong he prepared for Spejcher that night.
The argument to the jury by the
In my opinion, that's not regular marijuana. 30% of for flour is a lot.
Defense is that this was some kind of unique, super potent pot. That's not true. The pot was analyzed, what was left at the apartment. To Sean Amelia, this is Chad Amelia's dad. Chad was stabbed dead by a weed crazed girlfriend. You believe that the judge favored white women. Why do you say that?
Well, earlier on in the case, when the charges were being, the charging document was being changed, and the charges were being changed from murder to involuntary manslaughter, I addressed the court. And at that time, when I addressed the court, the judge actually started to, when he was speaking back to me, he was taking a position, and he was actually, instead of just listening to my comments, he was defending her. He was defending her actions. And at one point, I mean, I have a copy of that transcript. And at one point, that's when he sort of emphasizes, well, it's a very tough thing for somebody to lose their medical license. And I responded, I said, well, my son lost his life. How can you compare, her degree to my son's life? I was insulted by the remark. But I want to get back to what you guys, this has been bothering me for a long, long time. Her attorneys even now, they're still out there doing the victim blaming thing. And I mean, they're claiming that this marijuana was something that it was not. The marijuana was tested. And I don't smoke marijuana. I don't use marijuana. So I had to do a little homework on this myself. So my understanding from what I can gather in the research I've done, that high potency marijuana is anything over 20% THC content or 10 micrograms per dose. This marijuana was tested several different times, and the lab reports, and if I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong, but if the lab reports show it was between 12% and 16%. That is it. So this was no special strain, and the container that it came in had no warning label on it. And if I'm wrong, I want to be told I'm wrong. But I saw that in the evidence photos, and there was no.
I don't think any of my stuff from the dispensary has a warning label on it. Let me see something. I have a cartridge box right here that I just got from the dispensary. Oh, maybe it's in the bag that I threw out earlier. I don't know. I don't think it has a warning sign on it. I'm going to have to look the next time. What would the warning be? It may cause psychosis and you may unalive someone.
So, I mean, none of that, what they say, makes any sense to me. From the beginning, it was blame the victim, attack the witnesses, badger the witnesses, and then in the end, in Robert Schwartz's closing argument, and I think this really put the jury off, he actually started to attack Audrey. I mean, he was attacking the prosecutor, who had nothing to do with this other than presenting the evidence and the facts. So I'm disgusted in those two individuals as human beings. And
I'm also disgusted with the judge for allowing it. And you're allowed to argue in a closing statement. That's what it's all about, closing arguments. But you are not allowed to spout incorrect facts that are not in evidence, which is what he did. And attacking the prosecutor, that's to be disallowed. But, and we keep referring to her as a doctor. She's not a doctor. She has a doctorate in audiology. She is not a medical doctor. And her whining about how murdering your son is going to affect her future, I don't quite get that. And again, I understand where you're coming from. I'm not as angry about the BS claim that this is special potent marijuana. I'm angry that this woman can stab a defenseless guy. He didn't have a knife, he didn't have a gun, who's sitting on the sofa over 100 times and can walk free. No jail time based on a quack theory that she made up, claiming she was hearing voices that told her the more she stabbed him, the more she would live. I think I've got that right. If I'm wrong, somebody jump in and tell me. But Sean, when you heard the sentence, what went through your mind?
Well, I felt immediately that that the system had failed Chad, first of all, and that I could not, for the life of me, understand why we had to go through 5.5 years of going back and forth to courtrooms and just hearing her attorneys constantly ask for extensions and them being granted. And then I just felt that there's absolutely no justice in the system, and that the system is broken at this point.
Do you believe that she got a light sentence because of her gender and her education? That somehow a white woman is going to be believed in court when a minority, a black male, would not be believed in court? That's 2 tiers of justice. That's not what our founding fathers had in mind. That is not what the Constitution says. It's called equal protection under the law. Lady Justice is blind for a reason. She's not supposed to get a break because she's a more affluent, educated white female. That's not okay.
Yeah, I agree with you. And to answer your question, I absolutely feel that way. I said earlier in my comments, he didn't separate himself from seeing her as you described, and said, you know, this isn't the type of person that I should put in prison. For some reason that must have went through his head. But her brother, when he got up to give his remarks, and I was really angry about this, it was very difficult at times for me not to stand up and say things in that courtroom, because we went through this exercise of, giving the victims impact statements, which Judge Worley didn't even consider. He had written his remarks prior to and read from them on his sentencing decision. So we shouldn't have been put through that. But her brother gets up there and says, she's not the type of person that should go to prison. And I thought to myself, at that moment, do I stand up and say something here? Or
like Chad, like in this case, Chad's not the kind of person that should be dead and buried.
The people that are supposed to go to prison are people that break the law and don't adhere to the laws of the land. There is no like demographic, or there is no certain type of person that should or should not go.
Sentencing went down, and how this Judge Worley contorted the law. Is it true, Sean, that Chad's mother stricken died during the trial?
Yeah, about 1.5 years after we lost Chad, she had type 2 diabetes.
Man,
she just
man,
depressed.
man.
She
Hey, Berta.
isolated herself. So it's hard. You can think to yourself, is it to be happy with my other son? And all those, like, it's a feeling of guilt if I'm with my other son. And it was the same for Michelle. And it was worse for her. And she just declined. And I got a call from her good friend Lucretia Guzman, and she said, "You need to get to the hospital right away." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Michelle's not doing well." And when I got to the emergency department, I knew something really bad had happened because her sister was there, Lucretia was there, a few of her other friends were there. And I asked, "What's going on?" And then they just directed me into a room, and she was laying on a table. Pretty much, she was on life support, and she was already gone. She just couldn't handle it. And it's also hard for my younger son, Shane, because he feels in ways that, Michelle felt so bad about what occurred, but he wishes that, she would have focused more kind of on what we still have going forward. But she was unable to do that. She was just so focused on the loss of Chad that it just took her down.
Sean, Amelia, I don't, as the killer, the girlfriend, Bryn Spejcher, was walking out of court. You know what she said, right? She started bitching that she could not believe the judge had sentenced her to probation.
Are you kidding
she was
me?
Actually complaining on her way out of the
Wow.
courtroom. She should have been lying prostrate in the floor, thanking this judge for
She should be
completely ignoring his duty.
She should have been handcuffed. That's what she should have
Did you
been.
know that?
Actually, I was unaware of that. I can't did say that. She is lucky that she hasn't been incarcerated for murder, given some of the other evidence that was presented.
Could have been handcuffed instead of walking out.
I don't think she thought was going to be presented. Kind of doesn't surprise me. She portrayed.
I can't even deal with this girl. Mad because she got 2 years probation instead of life in prison. 108 times you're going to stab somebody and be pissed off because you got 2 years probation. Yeah, I should have been handcuffed.
This is who this person is. And this is why when we saw the text messages that were presented during the case, we realized that, she's really not presenting herself truthfully.
What did the text say?
The texts were, she made this claim that she was a naive marijuana user, and that the text before, these were texts before she had met Chad. And the texts were illustrating that, she was talking to her friends about marijuana use and about edibles and about how you can put oil on ice cream and get high from the marijuana oil. So it kind of, and I think
she's
the
a
jury
killer.
Are you serious right now, this conversation they're having? No, this is sick. Yeah.
And a liar.
I don't think she faces the reality of what she's done. I think that she believes that for some reason that she shouldn't be held accountable for any of this.
Exactly right.
So badly to know that the judge discounted everything you and your family have been through and sentenced this killer to straight probation. If you want your voice to be heard, contact Governor Gavin Newsom. He needs to hear this. Gavin.Newsom at gov.ca.gov. Repeat, Gavin.Newsom at gov.ca.gov. His number is 914-445-2841. Make your voice be heard. This
Absolutely
is not justice. And may Chad Amelia and his mother
rest in peace.
Find peace. Goodbye, friend. Guys, thank you for.
I will put Nancy's link in the chat. I am coming right back live. As soon as I end this, I'm coming back live. They're doing live searches for Maddie with the helicopters and stuff. I'm coming right back with that. So 1 minute. I will